Welcome to La Miranda Art Council's Art Embraces Words. My name is Bill Carmel, one of the curators for the La Miranda Arts Council. Thank you, artists, writers, and attendees for joining with Natalie, our co-chair and tech diva, and me today for our virtual event. We thank the Lafayette Community Foundation, who helped make today's events possible. La Miranda Arts Council ignites, promotes, and sustains artistic expression and appreciation in the visual, performing, and literary arts for people of all ages in our community. Currently, we manage 2 public galleries and sponsor over 10 active programs: Art Embraces Words, La Miranda Idol, the High School Visual Arts Competition, and the new programs Artify Orinda and Super Shorts, to name a few. We also offer benefits to our community members to showcase their creativity and talents. Check out all our programs on lamirandaarts.org. Art Embraces Words will be coming to you on several more occasions this year, so please check out the dates and times on our website. You may be wondering how Art Embraces Words came to be. It is the brainchild of Elana and other board members of the La Miranda Arts Council. Initially, they found no local venues for emerging writers to read their work, and we wanted artists to have more opportunities to show their work. Elana wanted writers to experience the special feeling of being in a venue that merged both visual art and writing. As she puts it, quote, "The same creative juice that flows from original art is exactly what I wanted emerging writers to feel surrounded by when they read their work in public, often for the first time." Thus, Art Embraces Words was born, finding its original setting in the Lafayette Library and Art and Sciences room. In essence, writers paint images with words, and artists tell stories with color. Together they enrich our community, and that is how Art Embraces Words came to be. Please forgive us our Wi-Fi and internet glitches. Our theme today is Heroes and Courage, and you will see this woven throughout our program. Greg Coplans is a retired lawyer who recently moved with his wife from Contra Costa County to Santa Fe, New Mexico. He is a member of the California Writers Club and has read short stories at the La Miranda Arts Council Art Embraces Words events in 2019. His short story, The Professor, was published by the Fiction Pool, a UK literary journal, in 2020. Please, Greg, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to write a story with a theme about not fitting in. And the setting for the story became an all-boys boarding school in England. It was an Anglican church high school, and Abe Cohen is the only Jewish boy at the school, so he didn't really fit in. In an earlier part of the story, Eddie, who is the narrator, explained Abe's situation as follows. In time, as my religious beliefs evolved into agnosticism, I understood the school functioned as a club, founded on a belief in the Holy Trinity. Here, Abe's nonconformity was perceived by many as a rejection of the moral order of the world as we saw it, and as a challenge to our belief. Entry into the club was therefore beyond his reach. In this excerpt, Abe is in his senior year and he shares a study with Eddie. Abe has just entered the study. It was evident from his countenance that Abe was agitated. "Bloody hell," he said, "somebody put my name down for the boxing championships." I knew that at his father's urging, he had reluctantly sparred with the boxing team, but had never participated in a boxing match. When I asked if he intended to withdraw his name, he confirmed that that had been his initial reaction. Then he said, "What really pissed me off was that whoever wrote my name down didn't consult me, and I don't have the faintest idea who it was. Someone is throwing down a challenge and summoning me to a duel. Well, this time I'm picking the glove up. But you're not a boxer, I reminded him. And just for the record, you won't ever catch moi in that ring. No matter, came his response. I more or less know how to jab. I think I can dodge serious trouble. And I might be lucky enough to survive one or two preliminary bouts. As word floated around the school that Abe's name was down for the boxing, a series of bawdy comments about his physical stature and dire predictions of his annihilation ran rampant through the school. Abe's response was to apply himself to training. Under the watchful eye of Mr. Sefton, the games master, he sparred against others in his weight division. Each evening in our study, he recorded his impressions of their boxing abilities, noting their vulnerabilities and strengths. Abe was, however, uncomfortably aware of a threat posed by a boy he had not encountered during his training. James Brute Anderson, the popular first-team rugby flank forward and captain of the cricket team, had the athletic ability, the burly shoulders, and the muscular build that made him the widely acknowledged favorite. Although Brute's aggressive boxing style lacked finesse, he quickly maneuvered his opponents against the ropes, where powerful uppercuts and right crosses overwhelmed them. No one wanted to face him. Abe's insecurity about his boxing skills was balanced by a belief that the threat of facing Brute was minimal. Brute doesn't worry me for a moment, he confided. I won't be able to box my way past anyone on the boxing team, so I'll be eliminated early on. Abe's fights in the preliminary rounds revealed a competent boxer whose speed, length of reach, and tap-tap jabs, coupled with the advantage of his studies of his opponent's tactics, took him through to the semi-finals. His rising confidence as he bobbed, weaved, and jabbed brought an unexpected victory in the semi-final. It was a bruising win and a hard-won match. What have I done? He asked that night. I never meant it to go this far. I don't have the faintest idea how I outpointed Maxwell. The following morning, he told me that the chilling reality of facing Brute in the championship round had kept him awake all night. I don't stand a dog's chance. Actually, I feel quite nauseous. Maybe I should see Matron and tell her I'm sick. You can't give up now, Abe. Win or lose, everyone will remember the fight. For years, they'll remind each other of the Abe Brute match. Surely that's something worth fighting for. Really? Is it? Was his terse reply. It's all very well for you. You aren't about to be battered into oblivion. I conceded he had a point. Dance, weave, bob, and jab, I encouraged him, trying not to laugh at his predicament. And sting like a bee. This produced a venomous look. That afternoon, tightly packed rows of chairs surrounded the ring in the school's gymnasium, allowing space only for the judges' table. The buzz of conversation ebbed away as the headmaster, the assistant headmaster, and Mr. Sefton entered the gym and seated themselves at the judges' table. The headmaster rose and waited for silence. I now call upon our two finalists, James Anderson of Fletcher House, and here he paused and looked down at the sheet of paper in his hand. Ah, yes, Abraham Cohen of Burton House, to take their places in the ring. A bedlam of noise heralded Abe and Brute's entrance to the ring. I looked at the two, Abe tall and skinny, Brute shorter, muscular and compact. What was Abe thinking as he looked at the contestant across the ring from him? Was his apparent composure simply a mask disguising his fear? I'm sure we're about to see an exciting contest, the headmaster began. I think you are all as surprised as I am to see the matching of our two finalists. Cheers and jeers roared from the audience, causing the headmaster to frown and look around the room until silence resumed. The championship will consist of 3 rounds of 2 minutes each. There'll be a 1-minute rest between rounds. Mr. Sefton will referee. Mr. Sefton beckoned the two boys who moved to the center of the ring and touched gloves. Abe later told me that after the bell rang, he heard only the rhythmic breathing and the sound of Brute's feet as Brute stalked him like a menacing tiger. He watched Brute's eyes and listened for any change of tempo in his breathing that would signal the initiation of an attack. I knew Brute would try to corner and demolish me with a flurry of blows, Abe confided, but as soon as I realized I had a longer reach, I knew I had a chance of holding him off with my jabs. All I wanted was to be standing on my feet at the final bell, so I kept moving in the center of the ring so he couldn't trap me against the ropes. The second round began. Abe continued his tactics of taking punishment on his arms and shoulders, jabbing and pivoting away from trouble. This strategy found little favor with the watching boys, who jeered him, calling Abe to stand and fight like a man, and exhorting Brute with calls to lay him out. I noticed from my second row seat that Abe's jabs and an occasional right cross were finding their target, and that Brute, whose easy wins came from a rapid pummeling of his opponents in the opening rounds, was becoming exasperated by his inability to pin Abe against the ropes. A rowdy audience greeted the start of the final round. The two boxers circled one another, probing and testing. Brute moved forward swiftly in a swinging two-fisted attack, desperate to bottle Abe up at close quarters. A powerful uppercut unleashed loud gasps of amazement from the watching boys, but narrowly missed Abe's chin. To my astonishment, and perhaps Abe's too, Abe launched a few counterpunches that caught Brute in the body and face. I noticed that Brute seemed to be tiring, was beginning to drop his guard, and was at an apparent loss as to how to deflect the jabs. The gymnasium filled with roars of encouragement for Brute as he unleashed yet another blistering attack, but a determined jab from Abe rocked his head backwards. Brute sank to one knee, fell forward, supported himself with both gloves, and shook his head. A stunned silence gripped the audience. Brute, it seemed, had no energy for another heavy-fisted attack, and the remainder of the round was characterized by peppering attacks from the vastly encouraged Abe. The final bell sounded, and the fighters touched gloves for the last time before returning gratefully to their corners. The end of the fight was greeted by wild applause from the juniors and controlled clapping from the senior school. The headmaster waved the students to stand and raised his hand for silence. Before announcing the judge's decision, I would like to congratulate both contestants on an excellent and sporting performance. It has been a very close boxing match. At this point, he paused to turn and confer with Mr. Sefton and the assistant headmaster. Then he announced the result. The winner of this year's school championship, by a 2-1 decision and a half-point margin, is Abraham Cohn of Burton House. The result was greeted by cheers from Abe's housemates and groans and subdued applause from Brute's many supporters. It was my notes that gave me an edge, Abe later told me. Brute's strategy of quickly cornering and overwhelming his opponents was predictable. I don't know what I would have done if he changed those tactics. He would have knocked me flat for sure. A few evenings later, Abe crossed the school quadrangle in the direction of the library. He told me that as he entered one of the dimly lit passages, he was thrust against the corridor's wall with such violence that he fell, striking his head. He stumbled to his feet, only to receive a ferocious blow to his stomach that winded him and produced the nausea he'd felt in anticipation of his match with Brute. Lying on the cold flagstones, fury drove him to his feet, but his head spun and he had to sit down. "My God, Abe, who attacked you?" I asked. "Freddie, it all happened so fast, I didn't get a chance to see him. I had to sit and rest for a while on the flagstones with my back propped against the corridor wall so I could recover. It was then that I heard the sound of approaching footsteps. I heard a familiar voice ask, "Abe, are you all right?" It was Brood Anderson. He wanted to know if I'd tripped and fallen. "What did you say?" I was upset, hurt, and suspicious, so I didn't answer him. But then, to my surprise, he stretched out his hand and helped me to my feet. Then I pushed him away. Abe paused. A brief silence lingered as he stared at a far corner of our study. He seemed quite moved. When he continued speaking, the words came out slowly, his voice somewhere between a half sob and a half laugh. "Freddie," he said, as Brute and I walked towards the library at the end of the passage, not speaking. I was utterly confounded when he casually threw a friendly arm around my shoulders. Thank you. That is the end.
Thank you, Greg. I'm just wondering, do you box?
Do I box? No, I've never boxed. I'm glad to say.
This selection seems to be about how beginning athletes think and succeed in a competition. Why did you choose boxing?
Well, this is a sort of a strange story that kind of tended to write itself. And Abe, through his 5 years at the senior school, is a competent athlete. And because he's a competent athlete, he tends to fit in, but not quite. And while he doesn't experience any anti-Semitism, any overt anti-Semitism, he does experience it on a much more subtle level. And I viewed this fight as a challenge for him, something he didn't want to go into, and yet he applied himself and was lucky to win. And that right at the end, the boy who'd been his opponent had kind of really welcomed him into the community by putting an arm around his shoulders. So that was the idea.
So is that the purpose of the ambush?
Yes. And again, I'm not too sure where that came from. Some people, when they write a short story, have a beginning, a middle, and an ending, and there's an arc to the story. I'm the kind of person who just writes, and often I don't know where the story is going to go or how it's going to end.
Well, that was something I was curious about, is whether you use storyboards or outlines or anything like that.
So
it seemed spontaneous to me.
Well, it was the only thing I can tell you about the story is that I went to a similar school in South Africa, so I knew what I was writing about. You know, people say write what you know, but the theme of not quite fitting in, there was something I observed among, you know, there were many boys who were ringleaders, many boys who just fitted into a group. And then there were some boys who, no matter what they did, just didn't fit in, and they were always picked on. And I wanted to write about that.
Yes. Well, I found it to be a compelling part of the story. So thank you, Greg.
Well, thank you very much.
No, it's what? Okay. So next is Elana Olaski. Elana Olaski is a journalist and writer actively involved in building community all over the East Bay. Most recently, she was part of a team of 7 nonprofits, which raised $22 $1,000 to provide 1,000 box meals, gratitude cards, and flowers to frontline hospital workers in Contra Costa County. Elana and her husband, Mr. Olosky, live in San Ramon, California, with Andy the Hummer and Rocky the Squirrel. It's yours, Elana.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us in Art Embraces Words today. I listed myself as, I don't know. I'm not really an artist as a photographer, but I feel like events where people in the community come together to recognize heroes and courage is something that needs to be celebrated. So somehow I wanted everybody to know about this. Can we see the first slide, please? So I'm going to read this to you. It says, "Dear healthcare workers, I admire you for working so hard. You are a true hero. I know it is hard during these times, especially. I should know, my dad is a doctor. Sometimes he leaves for a few days to work at a hospital. He sees COVID patients. Usually we talk over the phone, and some days we don't talk at all. I know how hard it is being away from your family." So this is one of 1,400 gratitude cards that we passed out to school children in San Ramon, Orinda, Lafayette, and Moraga. The 7 organizations that came together, community partners, to do this included the Orinda Association, the Loma Linda Arts Council, the Loma Linda Sunrise Rotary, the Orinda Garden Club, and I think that's it. Anyway, the point is we could have never distributed 1,400 gratitude cards without the help of all these organizations. There were 4 of us on the main team, and we had about 25 volunteers to work with. The reason I put this card up first is that it turned out at the end of the day that these cards were tremendously important. We found out from the hospital personnel that in the 6 hospitals we delivered these cards to, many of the people who worked there found a wall and taped them on the wall. The hospital workers felt so forgotten and unappreciated by the public that they needed to see this. And we had many, many comments about them. So artist Tim Hancock, who lives in Lafayette and has been featured in many Loma Linda Arts Council opportunities to show his work. He's a consummate artist. He does cartoons, he does videos, paintings, you name it, he does it. He has a piece of public art in Walnut Creek, if you've been downtown and seen those electric boxes that are painted. It was wonderful working with Tim. I lost count after 7, the number of times that our team kept sending things back and forth. No, change this, no, change that. I thought for sure he was going to show us the door, but he just went right along with it. So the card really showed how the community recognizes courage and heroism. If we don't recognize it somehow, nobody knows it happens. So if we could go to the next one, please. So this is a delivery to the San Ramon Regional Medical Center. 4 hospitals received 250 meals, 250 cupcakes, and a beautiful vase of flowers from the garden club, plus the cards. And Conrad Brees, who is the president of the Loma Linda Sunrise Rotary, spoke at the Orinda City Council meeting, where they gave a proclamation to all of us involved in this, including the restaurants. Of course, the food came from Orinda restaurants. That was the other half of the deal, to keep the restaurants alive. So the 22,000 went to the restaurants and the food went to the hospital workers. I have to read this. It's a quote from Conrad, and this is what he said in the city council meeting. My wife and I packed our car with 125 meals, cards, and the flowers and drove to our assigned hospital. When we arrived, the hospital workers were lined up in front. Many of them had tears running down their faces. This campaign was so needed, and we were glad to be part of it. This slide is from the frontline hospital workers at the San Ramon Regional Medical Center, inside enjoying all the food that we brought. And they gave us these photos. It was important for these 25 volunteers who went out to, let's see, I'll list the hospitals now. San Ramon Valley Regional Medical Center, Contra Costa Regional Medical Center, Kaiser Walnut Creek, Kaiser Antioch, John Muir Health Walnut Creek, and John Muir Health Concord. So we had volunteers delivering to all these places, and because of COVID, everything had to be done outside. So they had gurneys and all kinds of odd, contraptions to put the food on. And a local restaurateur, Michael Karps from the Fourth Bore in Orinda, has a fire truck that he has retrofitted to be a food truck. And I got the media involved by sending press releases saying we're delivering food to the hospitals in a fire truck. And I knew that would do it. And it was true. It was in the East Bay Times and of course the Orinda News and the La Orinda Weekly. So I'm hoping some of you out there might consider doing an event like this. It doesn't have to be as large as this one. Even if you have just a care home in your community, or maybe a vaccination site, people there need the personal touch. It's not enough to just drop off some food. They need to know with some kind of a card. It can be, they love things drawn by children. They need to be acknowledged personally. They need to see your body there. The more bodies, the better. It was astounding to us what the effect of this was. I get emotional every time I see this. I can't tell you how the difference in the administrators. They told us that they were at their wits' end, because these are the people who are holding the hands of those who are dying. Their families can't be with them. And this goes on. We don't see it in the hospitals, but it's going on all the time. So my friend Laurie Chung, who's the photographer for this photo, is a professional photographer. And she and the other women, the other three women on the core group who did this, were writing up a little how to do this in your community, which will be on our website in the future. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that you don't have to be super fit and strong and 21 to do these things. One day I heard a talk by a lay minister who had been called to go to Africa to be a witness to a village where the village had been burned because of blood diamonds. And his job was to be a witness to what had happened and to help rebuild the village. And when he gave this talk, he looked like he would fall over any minute. He was not a healthy guy. He was not a young guy. He was quite elderly. And afterwards I said, how did you do this in your health, with your condition the way it is, in your health condition? And he said, I pace myself. I take care of myself as best I can. The people I go to will help take care of me. You can be any age to do this. So I knew that this would be a stretch for me because I have a health condition, but I did it anyway. And I want to let my body, mind, and spirit choose the community activities that I want to take part in. I don't want to let the limited view of myself make my choices. Of course, I take care of myself, and it took me quite a while to recover from this, but I don't regret one day of it.
Thank you, Elana. It's been over a year since the worldwide pandemic and siege caused by COVID has really covered the world. And people like the frontline hospital workers have been forgotten. What you've done and what all the other people in your partners have done is one way we can support the daily courage and heroism of these workers. How do you think we can support them going forward?
My experience and the experience of everyone involved is that some kind of personal contact that obviously is safe, whatever goes on in the hospitals, having the gratitude cards or having signs made. One hospital wanted, like butcher block paper, like they use for elementary school projects, where children write, and children of all ages, including high school kids, write their thank yous and just give them different kinds of encouragement. It's basically that they need personal contact with members of the community on a regular basis, because it's simply too much for them to be the ones dealing with the dying all the time, and because their families can't be with them.
Thank you, Elana. It's truly a beautiful program. Next up is Sonali Jolly-Wadhwa. Sonali is a writer and poet. She writes in English, Hindi, and Punjabi, and has published poetry collections in all 3 languages. A wife and a mother living in Walnut Creek, she grew up in India and moved to San Francisco 25 years ago. A member of the Diablo Writers Workshop, she often writes about the intersection of her Indian and American lives.
Thank you, Bill. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. What I will be sharing with you today is a poem called The Color of Courage. And the theme for Diablo Arts Council this month was courage and heroism. And that's where the inception of the poem lies. I wrote it for this theme, and I'm very happy to share it with you today. The color of courage. Courage is the color of you, a shawl that you wear, swaddling it tightly around yourself until it becomes a second skin. Courage is letting your color wrap your body, but not your mind. Courage is to wear your color proudly as a pair of iridescent wings, but not to let it bind you like a cocoon. Courage is to let your color be part of you, but not to let it color all and every bit of you. Courage is to take that color off your tinted glasses, thick and myopic, and to look up and not allow it to morph into a colored glass ceiling. Courage is to be able to speak your mind without fear of color, yours or theirs. Courage is acceptance of its legacy, but not resignation to its history. Courage is allowing yourself to be shaken, but not broken, your color pristine, unblemished. Courage is to color the world with your creativity and to wash off the color of prejudice, every last hue of bigotry, each faded tint of discrimination. Courage is to learn to enjoy the different colors of the world, to let them mix and spread, to seep into each other, blending without smearing. Courage is to hold the palette aloft, to let it fly like a pennant, each color overflowing, one complementing the other, completing the collage. Courage is not envisioning a tangram of colorless utopian uniformity, but rather a jigsaw where colors as pieces come together, diverse and different, blinking arm in arm, each one unique in tint, tone, and shade, each one with a part to play in bringing together the whole, completing the vibrant picture. Courage is gathering fragments of broken glass and joining together the shards anew, with resolve and resolution, holding them up and seeing the world in a different light, a color you hadn't seen before. Courage is the color of another perspective, a new color that doesn't change the reflection of your skin, but casts new light on other colors your eyes can see. Courage, then, comes wrapped in color, in all and every shade of brown, black, and white. Courage. It tears open the wrapping, shedding it like molten skin. Courage. Born in color, raised to outgrow it, nurtured to overwhelm it, promised to overcome it. Courage is the color within. Thank you. Well, I can't see anybody else on my screen.
Sorry about that.
Okay, welcome back.
I really love the beat created by the repetition of the words courage and color.
Thank you.
For me, you verbally stitch all your metaphors of courage into a quilt of many colors. I'm curious, what parts of your three cultures do you most enjoy writing about? And do you write about them in each of the languages? For instance, do you write about English topics in Hindi or Punjabi and vice versa?
You know, in English, first of all, I feel blessed. I feel blessed that I speak more than one language. I can read and write in more than one language. I think it's a blessing to be able to express oneself in different ways, because each language brings itself a wealth of its own culture, its own heritage, its own writers, expressions, phrases. So it really, I feel that it has enriched me deeply to be able to speak them and compose in them. So for Hindi and Punjabi, I would say, I'm a poet at heart. That's my favorite genre of writing. And that's what comes most naturally to me. And so it's not surprising that in Hindi and Punjabi, I mostly write poetry. And in English, which is the language I think which I'm most well read in. I read most widely in English. So I'm exposed to various kinds of writings, and that informs how I write. So when I write in English, which is the majority of my writing, that is, I go beyond just poetry. I write personal essays, memoir essays, short stories. So, like I said, each language brings with itself just a treasure of its own heritage, and that then informs how and what I write in that language.
That's great. That answers my question completely. I have a question from the audience. Amatage, I hope I pronounced that correctly. She asks, how did you get the idea to compare and contrast color and courage?
So, when I read the theme, courage, what came to mind was everyday courage, not some major acts of heroism or, epochal, path-breaking events of heroism, but everyday courage. And, when I write, there are different things that come together, they coalesce and get translated into words. Like there's what's going on inside me, first of all. What are the emotions I'm experiencing at the time? What's going on around me really informs what I'm writing. So the socio-political atmosphere that, that's been going on around us for a bit now. And then typically, especially I would say for poems rather than the other genres, I usually a word, a string of words, or a catchphrase gets stuck in my head. It's like a hook, kind of like the anchor piece of what's to come. For lack of a better analogy, I would say it's like the end of a thread, like a spool of yarn, and I grip onto the end, and I start unspooling it, and then that's how the writing just unfolds. And the words just get translated from my thoughts onto paper. And usually I don't know where the journey is going to lead me. I don't know how it's going to end up. So for example, for this poem, I think the words, let your color be a part of you, but let it not color every bit of you was that the catchphrase that became the touchstone for me. And then color, it all became about color and courage.
Fabulous. Thank you, Sonali.
Thank you.
Next up is Lance Jackson. Growing up between Ann Arbor and Detroit, Lance Jackson trained as a painter, designer at Washington University in St. Louis and Rhode Island School of Design. After over 15 years in print journalism, illustration, and design at the San Francisco Chronicle and Examiner, he has broken out as a freelance illustrator. A partial client list includes Adobe Systems, Cisco Systems, Bell South, Dominican College of San Rafael, Macworld Expo, Open Contact, Oracle, San Francisco Study Center, Sports Illustrated, Red Bull, The Washington Post, and VDME. Lance is an adjunct professor at City College of San Francisco and the California College of the Arts. He is a current member of SIGGRAPH and has held memberships in the American Institute of Graphic Arts and the Society of Newspaper Design. Welcome, Lance.
Hey, thank you, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Bill. I'd like to welcome everybody coming to this webinar. What I'd like to do is speak about
They need to highlight your face.
3 images and 2 other images that came out of a group of recent images.
You need to be highlighted.
In terms of the theme of courage, recently been looking at certain political events since 2017, and these first 3 images come out of a show entitled Democracy that was shown at City College of San Francisco, and now the whole collection is at Saginaw Valley State University in north of Detroit, which is, I'm glad that it's in Michigan. What you're seeing here are black and white prints. The final output was actually large sepia prints run off an architectural blueprint machine. Just for a little bit of technical background, they're 3 feet high by varying widths, some 12 and some up to 20 feet. But that first image, I thought was interesting in terms of individual courage in the political realm. Senator Flake, during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, asked for a 1-week delay for an FBI investigation before confirming Brett Kavanaugh. And in some ways, this photograph that I use mostly photographs from newspapers, having a background in journalism. I'm trying not to put any opinion spin on any of these images, but just rendering the images, not unlike artists did back in the Middle Ages, of trying to provide some information or about life in general. But this also sort of felt like it was sort of like a Caravaggio painting, not unlike Salome cutting the head off of Sansom. You can see we have 3 Republican senators here: Tom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina; Lindsey Graham on the right, South Carolina. You might say this is somewhat of a boxing match in a seated position. And then to the immediate left, seated is a guy named Mike Crapo. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce that, but he's a Republican from Idaho. I just thought it was interesting, these 3 older guys sort of hovering over Jeff Flake, and the people in the background are more younger assistants, and sort of wondering what the whole game is going on here. I don't know, maybe it's a common reflection in terms of what's happening now. Paul Ryan was down in Simi Valley talking about what happened to the Republican Party. But I'll just step away from that. I just find that individual acts of courage and heroism, it seems to be illustrated here in this one photograph and rendering. So in some ways trying to extend the impact of that particular incident. Can we go to the second image, please? Thank you. This is another form of heroism and courage is people, not like Elena's hospital healthcare workers, sort of thinking about people who are in police positions of police, firefighters, healthcare workers, and now delivery drivers. Again, these images were before the pandemic, so I was trying to find something that might be applicable. And I think with maybe this is we have to find our own individual courage as wildfire season approaches us again, and also to work as a societal group to react against these fires and also give ultimate praise to the people who step much further ahead of us than we are capable to be doing ourselves without having the skill level that these firefighters have. So yeah, my hat and hands go out to these people across our society in the effort to maintain the structure of the society that we have that goes from country to country. Can we go to the third one, please? This goes back a little bit earlier. I don't know, you may remember Black Friday, that day before, it's after Thanksgiving, excuse me, where a group of activists, I think this is like one of the first times I saw Black Lives Matter come to a head, maybe not so much before, but it certainly is in the mainstream now. But these 4 individuals, five, there's a person on the BART train. So these people held hands and they put these metal sleeves and, chained themselves to the BART train and then to the seated chair to the left, and basically held up the whole transit system until going into San Francisco to shop. And I think this is sort of a group form of courage that extends itself, and it was the beginning of a series of these more further events that became more poignant and perhaps more devastating than this shutting down the this shopping day of consumerism. Having been a BART rider all the time, I always think it's an important form of system for transportation. Can we go to the other one? Oh, that was my wife's asking me to. Well, what year was that? And that was 2012. So that was 2 years before Ferguson and subsequent events. These next 2 images are sort of more localized, thinking about courage and how climate change is affecting us all. And of course, this is before the pandemic. But I thought the thing about gasoline stations by Chevron, if you can see that, is if you notice the price of the gas per gallon there. And that may be, it's not like Road Warrior, but the sense of limited resources and how we're all going to have to adapt to this. And also have people sort of alongside playing with their phones and could be in homeless people. We can start to see more homeless people throughout the whole area and across the United States, and perhaps the how we choose to close our eyes towards these people. But I'm just sort of a way of thinking about people who are a new way of commuting and whatnot. Although remote work may be more effective than simply commuting by BART, but at some point this could happen. So, and also there's an exit sign is highlighted too. Can we go to the fifth image? These two images were actually shown at the Orinda bookstore, I don't know, a couple of years ago. So I always like to render places that are in San Francisco when possible, or in this case, Orinda. This is in the fall of 2019, and this is just a response to just the air quality and not the sense of the pandemic that would happen in the next year. So I don't know, it's kind of a precursor to these things, orange skies and whatnot. But you can sort of see there's variations on the theme about how to mask yourself. And these are more transparent, so we can actually see the faces and whatnot too. There's a portable generator in the front. There's a guy with an umbrella over to the side trying to steer his way through the soot and the ash or whatnot. And also I've learned from drones that there are metallic umbrellas that you can actually use so they can't sight you or locate you. So that's another sort of oddity that one can deal with, as opposed to turning off your location on your GPS and your cell phone. Yeah, I don't know. I'll just leave it there. So there's courage in current events, and I'm just asking for maybe courage for all of us when we look at the state of affairs of our climate right now and whatnot. So.
Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome.
I really enjoy your artwork, and there are some things that I have to ask you about. One of the things that I really like about your work is the calligraphy of your marks. And to me, it's one of the ways that your figures really feel alive in the world you create. Is this a signature for you, or is it something that is part of a style that you've developed, and did it come gradually or all at once?
It's a good question. I guess I always thought I didn't have a style, but it just seems like the style just became, just like every other artist has their own unique style. If you look at illustrators or painters and whatnot, they all have a certain unique touch to it. It is a signature of some sort that's based in calligraphy or painting, John Singer Sargent, whatnot, Degas, whatnot. I think I just like the sketchy quality of pencils, and I used to do courtroom sketching, so you had to be really quick, trying to capture the look-alike of people, or the essence. Even though some of the people that I did capture, they just didn't like the way I rendered them in the courtroom anyway. But in my mind, I guess they looked like it. So, but that's part of the process. I like just using a lot of multiple lines and just trying to figure out how to. It's almost like sculpture too. That it's maybe Daumier. If you ever seen Daumier's political cartoons, but it's also his. He did caricatures in clay, and they're just really wonderful. They're almost like if you've seen the group of the Spitting Image in England. is sort of like Dominique's work is sort of exemplified in their own style like that and emphasized. I don't know, I think it's kind of like leaving the trail of how the image is made too. You know, it's a process where it's okay to leave a lot of multiple lines in there, and marks and smears and stuff, and it's almost like drafting paper, you know, before SketchUp and AutoCAD came into fruition, that, you know, people used to just work on vellum and really hard pencils and try to draw a really nice straight line, but there's always a lot of sketchiness, and almost like architecture, you know, rough sketches, things are done like that. So hope that answers it.
Yeah, hi Lance. This is I'm the technical person. There's some questions here from Amitaj.
Yes.
First question is, did you initially take a picture and then draw it? And I had that same exact question.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure if it was a picture and you draw over it, or if you actually sketched that picture.
yeah, I see the Q&A now. I pulled up the button box. That's a great question. I usually, with the advent of Google and news items on the web, I usually just peruse images from the web and download them and use those as reference. And I just feel that there's a lot of people tracing stuff these days, which is okay. Shepard Fairey's kind of a guy who likes to trace things, and he's gotten into trouble from tracing over a picture of President Obama at the time. And I always rather just use reference, and I like to think that there is part of being an artist that you should be able to draw capably. You know, maybe I just took too many drawing classes back in art school, but I felt it was as part of a rendering thing is supposed to be good.
The other question is, do you draw from memory?
I can. I usually try to find reference as much as possible. I think those last two images are just sketches of people that I saw. Particularly the woman on the left-hand side walking. There's really not much of a reference for that, so I try to be as analytical as I can. I used to, in art school, I used to go down to the med school where they used to cut apart the cadavers and watch the med students, you know, take them apart. So I just wanted to learn how, you know, what's the bone structure, what's the muscles behind, you know, beneath our skin and stuff like that. So I mean, it's what those plastic surgeons all playing around with, pushing and pulling. So I don't know. I just like to draw as much as I can.
And then there's a comment, as you can see, from Jim Gunchinen. He wanted to say thank you for the beautiful, heartfelt work, and I feel the same way. I mean, it's especially the ones of Arinda that, like, it looks like sort of future renderings, and it's pretty amazing. Amazing.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate those kind words. I try to do my best to render things and try to, I don't know, project. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I've been thinking with this pandemic, I stopped working for a while. There is a group called amplifier.org that has calls for entries for people who do renderings of healthcare workers and people wearing masks and stuff like that. So if you're interested in seeing that, check that out on amplifier.org for something more pandemic related and stuff.
Okay.
Well, I'm wondering if I'm back.
Yeah, you're back. Hey,
You're back.
I apologize for that. It was one of those glitches.
Hey, it happens.
It does. I had another question, and that is, the figures in your work look like they may be portraits. Some obviously are. What about the rest? And what is it about making portraits that attracts you?
I like rendering people or trying to get them as accurate as I could. I think it just comes out of journalism too, that trying to provide something from an earlier era where, you know, people were rendered and put on in newspaper or magazines and whatnot. So I think that's also a part of what an artist can do. And I've also painted portraits of people and whatnot. So, I think most of the ones, at least in the news, in the actual news events, I tried to render all those people exactly as I could, without adding in anything else. I did another large one of a science march that was in 2017. And so I just took a lot of photographs, I mean, clips or screenshots, and sort of put them all together in San Francisco with all these kind of cool signs and stuff that were memorable and also applicable for, you know, belief in science and whatnot like that. So simple signs like, how do you think we got to the moon? Things like that, you know. Yeah, I know it's fun to do loose drawings too, and you know, maybe just more. I think more of this becoming more attracted towards the dark and light. You know, Caravaggio, these sort of things, and Chiaroscuro, I think, if I can pronounce that right, and John Singer Sargent. I guess, yeah, I guess I've gotten to be more of a you know, traditional social realist, if there's such a term. I don't know.
Well, I think all of those things are true, and you're looking at some of the greats. And I think that your work is extraordinarily expressive, and that it is accurate, if that is something that is artistic. It certainly is for me. But I think that you've moved beyond the kinds of things that artists have been doing in the past, and you've moved all of us into something very contemporary.
Yeah, I think Christo always had a great quote. You know, the guy with the running fence that says, "One must be one's own time." So no matter what you do, one has to be applicable to where we are here now, as they say. So
I agree. And we have a comment from Sonali. She says, "Very eloquent pictures, Lance. They speak to the viewer." Thank you.
Well, I hope it mirrors some of the Sonali's words about courage and color. Yeah, that's great. You know, using the words that start with C. They're not D words, so they're C words. So they're more positive.
Well, thank you very much, Lance. I appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.
Next up is Jane Blomstrand, and she's an educator with over 30 years of experience in schools. She's a former Teacher of the Year and has held many different positions in education, including classroom teacher, literary specialist, elementary school principal, and director of teacher credentialing program. When her grandkids started school, they began to ask her, what does the principal do all day? So when she retired, she enrolled in a creative writing class and began recording many of the stories that happened during her time as principal. Encouraged by her classmates, she published Meet the Principal, My Journey Beyond the Curriculum, an anthology of her experiences. Most principals have stories like these. Some stories will make you laugh, some will make you smile, and hopefully some will touch your heart. Currently, Jane is enjoying coaching new administrators. She and her husband, dog, and 2 cats live in Northern California. Jane reads from her selection, In the Dark. Welcome.
Thank you, Bill. Welcome, everyone. The story I'm going to read today is about one student's experience during distance learning. As a retired school principal, as Bill mentioned, I coach new administrators, and their journey, along with their teachers' journey during this pandemic, has been nothing short of amazing from my perspective. They have been true heroes throughout this whole COVID time. I published my book, Meet the Principal, My Journey Beyond the Curriculum, last year before the pandemic, and it's a collection of stories of my experiences. But now I have many new and different stories like the one I'm reading today. They come from my experience. They come from the experiences of the new principals I've been coaching during this time of distance learning. I hope you enjoy the story. There were many things to teach students about distance learning during the COVID-19 pandemic. Most important were how to mute themselves, how to turn video off and on, and how to use the chat feature. Second grade teacher Hannah Long spent time in the beginning of the year on these things so instruction would go smoothly. One area she couldn't control, though, was the conditions in the homes where her students were accessing instruction. It was now 1 week into distance learning, and Hannah wondered why one of her students, Julian Pena, always sat in the dark during class. She could barely see him because the room he was in had no light on. But when he did come to class meetings, he engaged in the discussions and turned in his homework. Hannah liked having Julian in her class. He was eager, responsive, and he caught on quickly to new concepts. But she had little idea what he looked like. His Google Classroom screen was always dark. She decided she needed to ask him about it. She would talk to him at recess, but right now she was teaching subtraction. The kids used small whiteboards to record their work. Julian was showing his whiteboard on the screen for Hannah when all of a sudden the light turned on in his room. She could see someone else behind him laughing. It looked like it might be an older brother. Julian began waving his arms. His screen was muted, but judging from the expression on his face, it looked like he was yelling at the other person. This commotion disrupted her lesson as the other kids were focused on Julian's screen. When she observed more carefully, she realized that he wasn't in his bedroom at a desk. He wasn't at the kitchen table. Julian was in a bathroom sitting on a toilet lid. All the students' screens were muted, but she could see snickers erupt throughout her classroom. Soon Julian disappeared from view and his screen went blank. He didn't return to class for the rest of the day. Hannah was concerned. She was sure he had left class because he was embarrassed. He could have been crying and didn't want the other kids to see him. Had he always been in the bathroom for all the other sessions? If so, that was probably why his screen was always dark. She was aware that Julian's mother was recently jailed for a minor drug offense, and that Julian and his brother and sister had gone to live with their grandma. But why was he in the bathroom for class? After school, she needed to go to the office to find out more about his situation. Someone needed to make a phone call home to get more information. Luckily, after school, she found Marcy Davidson, the vice principal, in her office. Hannah explained how Julian was attending class from his bathroom. Marcy shook her head. I'm not surprised. There's a lot of people living in that one-bedroom apartment. It's probably the only quiet place he could find. Oh, geez, poor little guy. He tries so hard. I know. I've been talking with Grandma about another of her grandkids. Let me make a phone call home to find out what's happening with Julian, and I'll get back to you. Later that afternoon, Marcy found Hannah in her classroom. Well, it's even worse than I thought. There's about 15 people living in Grandma's one-bedroom apartment. 15 people? You've got to be kidding. Marcy explained that not only were Julian and his siblings living there, but one of Julian's aunt was out of the area and Grandma was caring for her 4 kids. And in addition to that, another of Grandma's daughters and her family were staying there temporarily while escrow was closing on their new home. Hannah couldn't believe it. No wonder Julian was in the bathroom trying to attend class. He couldn't find any other place to study. There was probably not an inch of space where he could sit and concentrate with no interruptions. She asked Marcy what they could do to help him. Do you know what the other kids are doing for school? Surprisingly, most of them are not even school age. Julian has a brother in middle school, and one of the other kids is here in 4th grade. I'm not sure what they do to access their class, but I can find out. Do we have an extra headset somewhere? And do we still have any of those tall trifold dividers that kids use in the science fair? Yeah, I think so. Good idea. Let's go check. After rummaging through the school storage closets, Hannah and Marcy found a headset and an extra trifold divider. These would be perfect for him, Hannah thought. He could find a corner of his apartment, put the headset on, and sequester himself behind the divider. Then he wouldn't have to be at school in the bathroom. They contacted Julian's grandma and arranged for Hannah to deliver the materials to the house that afternoon. Grandma greeted Hannah at the door and Julian was behind her. Hannah explained to them what the divider and headset were for, and she gave them to Julian. He immediately put the headset on when she gave it to him. A big grin spread across his face. But soon his smile disappeared and he looked up at Hannah. I don't want to go back to class and see the other kids. I'm afraid they'll laugh at me. Hannah's heart melted. Julian, they won't even remember. With that headset on, you'll look like a jet fighter pilot ready for takeoff and they'll think you're really cool. He beamed. From that day forward, whenever Julian attended class, he always wore his headset. And the school ordered more headsets and trifold dividers. They wanted to make sure no other student was forced to learn in the dark.
Thank you, Jane. I'm wondering if there are any questions from our audience. I do. I have a question. This scenario seems like it could happen in any household, in any classroom. Have teachers and administrators observed new or accentuated student behaviors at home and in the classroom since COVID?
Have they seen more?
Or new behaviors?
Yes, definitely. Just like this one. I mean, teaching on a screen and learning on a screen is a whole different type of environment that our teachers had to adapt to very quickly last spring, and our students, both of them had to adapt. So I think the discipline issues have probably been minor, but there have been several that I have heard about with just different situations that teachers have encountered with kids. Trying to engage kids in a screen is a challenge, and a lot of teachers have adopted different techniques. One technique I heard about was stickers, and teachers putting a sticker on their forehead, putting a sticker on their nose, putting a sticker on their cheek. Every time a student answered a question correctly, or every time a new student in class answered a question, and sometimes these teachers would end up with 15 stickers all over their face. And it was definitely a way to engage kids because the kids began paying attention to when, I want to see her put her another sticker on her face. So they would answer questions and they would volunteer in class. So there have been a lot of different ways that teachers have used to engage their students to keep them interested.
Oh, thank you, Jane.
Mm-hmm.
And this concludes our event for today. If you'd like more information on any of our writers and artists, please reach out to us here. We welcome your comments or feedback. Let us hear them. Also, the Loma-Linda Arts Council is a nonprofit organization that relies on the support of our community to make our worthwhile programs like Art Embraces Words happen. Please consider making a donation to the Loma-Linda Arts Council. Thank you again to the authors and artists for being here, and thank you all for watching this Loma-Linda Arts Council Art Embraces Words. Have a great evening.